we've obviously know that the Casey report has come out. And what I wanted to try and deal with here is that we've had a lot of talk about the initial findings of the Casey report. I think one of the things that I would say, and if I've got the kind of mouse, if I can, I can just put it in to get into this part on here. And there we go. So I'll pull this up. I want to try and deal with just some of the key points of it, and then dive into one or two what I regard as really, really quite serious elements about it. The first of all is that the paedophile sexual exploitation of girls we've known has gone on for a while, and we've been speaking about it. The show's been speaking about it. Lots of people have been speaking about it. And we, of course, know that they excluded it and turned around and said, right, it just didn't exist. And everybody was attacked pretty much, as I would say, like Delingpole was at the beginning.
James, so is this a cultural problem in this country?
I don't think that there is a so-called rape culture. I think it's a very emotive phrase. I think most men... I think most men know that no means no. I don't think that we've become more of a rapey society. But I think one of the points you made, you referred, I think, to the grooming gangs in Rochdale and in Rotherham, and it's not just in the north. It's in Telford, in Norfolk. It's happened. We've got these organised gangs, mostly of Muslim origin. I think we need to. It's a fact.
There we go. So just, because of the sake of time, I'm going to cut that. We all know that. We saw it on Tommy Robinson. And at the time, we had the argument that we were saying that it was all covered up. There was no issues about this. So we now know from the Casey report that's wrong, because we've got the data. And we have here in Adam Wren talks about the data in there, the ethnicity of them, the total people. This was being used at the time to say that it's just white people were just involved in this. And then we come out with the national report, which is there on the link for anybody who wants to read 197 pages. I've gone through most of it. And so to cut through of it. And what we found very clear is on the key points, data suppression. As we know, we found the ethnicity of the perpetrators is shied away here. 2/3 of the perpetrators were Muslims. So the argument that you saw with Delingpole being attacked, and then the efforts of people to say it was all about white people and used in reports, was untrue. We know that there's the growth of online exploitation that's involving white girls. That's a key point that's come out of there. We've also had the fact that more about... For some reason, the legal failures, I might have to come back, and maybe I'm just coming across it too quickly here. Online exploitation. And we had this point, we saw the cases where most child sexual abuse were made up of white men, and this was the Home Office reporting itself. And so you got this was the basis of what you saw in a lot of attacks that were going on particular individuals. And then we saw what we're doing this, again coming in. Personally, I always like to show this one, is the way that...
So are you seriously suggesting there aren't white drug dealers and there aren't white gangs?
Of course I'm not, no.
Or Sikh gangs or any other kind of...
No, I'm not, but I'm saying some of these specific issues are coming from the Islamic community, solely the Islamic community.
Right, so we all of that, so the evidence that was used by the media, the Guardian, the journalist was based on that particular report. And what I found very fascinating about it is, I'm not going to do the Rupert Lowe story. We've already seen that many times, but it's the same sort of argument. Why are you doing this? It's white people in there as well. And yet the great thing that came out of this report is that it showed that group-based sexual exploitation characteristics of the offender was that this was where the report was made by the Home Secretary.
And I think I've looked through some of this in the past, and even within the data that they're saying just shows, it's mainly white people. Even within that, there are little nestled paragraphs that say, well, also it does seem that they're disproportionately compared to the overall population within the country. It does seem to be like Pakistani men committing more of these crimes, but they'd ignore all of that information.
And you're quite right. When you do look into this particular report, there are elements of those clear cases, but were ignored. And I think if I'm going to go back onto this now, I seem to be flicking away. You then get, it was Priti Patel who presided over that report. And if you remember what Priti Patel, she came out recently and said it was all great about the Boris wave. Nothing was wrong with it. And she also then went, there was disproportionate gang offending by ethnicity. So the very elements within their own report, which she presided over, she was in control of that report, was ignored. And this is one of my key points about it, is two elements that come from this. But then Casey comes out, and it's at point 6.23 of the report. It basically says it is about ethnicity. The ethnicity was it. So what I wanted to look back upon is how this state built up this kind of initial idea just to challenge Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson comes out. He says that we've got Muslim gangs out there. The evidence starts coming through on Telford. We see it down in Norfolk. We know that it's coming from Rotherham. People start to speak about this, and Dellingpole gets on TV. And then they're saying, we've got a problem with this. So we produce a report which is presided over by Priti Patel that has clauses that indicate yes, but predominantly uses data that suggests it's white men, so that the newspapers like The Guardian, that you then challenge it back. And I find that particular kind of historical way that the civil service and the media work together to crush the idea, that's why I think that 6.2.3, coming out on this, is actually really instructive for us. Because just as you've talked about weapons of mass destruction and the way that they're creating a narrative, that narrative is brought back to some sort of academic, the academic in the Brookings, who's now saying, let's work towards, destroying Iran by regime change. And they set out that picture. We also have the academics, and I put in the names of that sexual exploitation case in there.
And then if you do want to speak about it, and you do want to actually highlight the reality of what we're dealing with like Dellingpole did in the beginning, what we'll do is we'll stick you on national TV, and we'll get you surrounded by a bunch of really liberal, it's not in my backyard audience members. And they will just jeer, and it makes me hot with rage to see it, to jeer and shame you, so that you at home, viewer, know not to talk about this, that it's bad manners to talk about this, and that you're a bigot for talking about it.
And even more infuriating than that is that a lot of these people do know what's going on. And this is the same problem that I've seen with many people. There's two understandings of any situation, which is the behind the scenes understanding of the situation, where you'll talk to these people where nobody's watching, and they'll admit that there is something going on, they'll admit knowledge of what's going on, but then for public perception, when they're out in front of a camera, they will lie. They will lie, they will sneer, they will insult you, so that everybody knows that this is an uncouth opinion to have, and hoping that you'll just go by social convention.
And I agree. This is part and parcel of their shtick. It's a way of controlling us. And I find it really quite interesting in a kind of intellectual sense, but also the way that Casey has come out and blown this away. And we know that the civil service are trying to protect themselves. That's why the report doesn't go on to a national inquiry that deals with the Home Office. And when you look at the conversations and discussions that were made between Journalistic Questions and Kemi Badenoch yesterday, even she did not accept that we were pursuing the same sort of civil servants that have already been raised concerns about by Dominic Cummings. They're protecting their own. And yet we have someone like Casey who's given us the opportunity to say, no, this is wrong, look back upon it. And that
it's institutionally sanctioned now, which means that some people are allowed to admit it. The best example that I saw, I don't know if you've got it in here, have you seen Owen Jones' about face on this subject, where there was the recent clip after this report came out where he said it is happening and it is related to ethnicity and it's not racist to talk about it, and then you contrast it with a clip from only 2 years ago, 2023, where he says it's not happening and the only reason that you would think it is happening is if you're racist. So that just goes to show how quickly these people, these cockroaches, will turn when all of a sudden, the correct institutions, the experts say that I'm allowed to say it now.
That's right. And I saw it yesterday with a Rotherham mayor who said that we wouldn't have any investigation in Rotherham, but now questioned yesterday was saying, well, the case report says we must have one, so therefore we're going. But her opinion really hasn't changed. The individual hasn't changed. That person can't say one thing and another and really believe two distinct elements. They're only doing what they're told to do. And that's a great word to use, cockroaches, about them. I think it's very important.
Scuttle away.
The second major take that I want to take from it is the blowing of this argument that asylum seekers and illegal immigrants are not involved in this. I remember this came up on The Sun 2020. Police Scotland took down a large-scale asylum seeker grooming gang in Glasgow, but kept it secret. Now, I would like to see anyone involved in Police Scotland go to prison for this.
Yeah.
Because I think they've aided and abetted abuse by not doing anything, on that. But here is the point, and I'm going to try and whip through this. Dr. Ellie Cockbain, maybe I not pronounced her name. Yeah. She wrote into this piece of written evidence to the Home Select Committee.
When was it that she wrote this in recently?
This is around between 2020.
When the initial report came out.
So it's coming in here, and I think I did a clip for it just because I wanted everybody to be able to see what this type of individual who's regarded as an expert on grooming gangs, on sexual exploitation, on slavery, who admits that their organization was funded. I think if I go back to this part here and go right to the top of it, she talked about how well we are as an organization, how important we are in terms of developing it, and they were given there £2.4 million in research funding in 2013 and another 1.6 million. Now, I'd love to have been given 1.6 million to be able to investigate this and do the reports, but it wouldn't be this report. It would actually have been showing the truth. And the element that she puts out in there at the very bottom, it says, we have a very dubious, lots of propagated, dangerous, inaccurate and racist stereotypes about child sexual exploitation. So this particular individual is able to write this report funded by the government to create a narrative that there is no criminality behind illegal immigrants committing sexual abuse and paedophilic activities because
of sheer ideological aversion to the natural conclusions of what the evidence points to, or the truth.
Yeah, and again, one of the worst things about all of this is not just covering the crimes that have already been committed, but the fact that by misinforming people, you are allowing crimes to be committed again in the future, because people who are not skeptical, people who trust authority, will see that and they'll say, I have nothing to be worried about. You are misinforming them and not giving them the information they need to make the correct judgments to keep themselves safe. They're walking home alone at night, and they might, if they'd been informed properly, choose a safer neighbourhood to go down, but they don't know that the dangerous neighbourhood is a dangerous neighbourhood and something terrible happens.
They don't know that taxi drivers were being used to drug people and bring them across lines and transport them. Yeah. And so what we have here again in the Casey report, this is the discussion of live police operations, significant proportion of cases involving suspects who are non-UK nationals and or who are claiming asylum in the UK, completely blowing the narrative of that Ellie Cockburn. I think there's a lot of other words that we can use in her surname in relation to that, quite frankly, and any comments below are more interesting versions than the ones I'm allowed to say. But that type of individual I find disgusting. I find it utterly disgusting and depraved to write a report that has led directly to policy, newspaper articles that have hidden the truth of the numbers, and so that girls and people and families have been destroyed because she's trying to keep that narrative. And I'm pleased about the second key point. I find this the second really key point about this report, is to sow the seeds that it's not all white people. The majority are Pakistani Muslims and other countries as well. We now know Iran, Iraq. So the end of it will be cultural aspects about it.
And again, the argument is made as if to say that, well, you have native abusers.
Yes.
So therefore what?
It's men.
Therefore, what? So just because we already have people who abuse people in this country who are from this country originally, doesn't mean that we should put up with or ignore foreign populations. Even if it was only a couple of people, we still need to deal with that as a problem.
Yeah, and the other argument I'm not dealing with here because Casey doesn't deal with it in particular, but it's one that I think we should deal with, is the argument it's men. Yes, the vast majority of these people are involved in men. I heard a stupid woman on LBC talking about how it's women and men and white people together about it. There were women involved. It's like minuscule numbers. It is a majority of men. It is majority of men in terms of proportionality nationally of a Muslim background. But it isn't men as a whole. The proportions of people involved in this are minuscule in terms of the percentages of men committing these rapes across the country. When they talk about white men, we've got a vast majority of white men who are not doing this. They're like us, just being honest and decent individuals, treating women with respect. And I've got to go and tell my daughter not to be afraid of all men, because there are those out there who are saying it's men all the time. Yes, men commit it, but not all men. But then we've got, thankfully, Stark Naked Breathe here is very good, I find, actually, bringing out some real good data from the Minister of Justice on foreign national sex offences, again showing that we've got the context of foreigners coming into this country, committing the offences. But the one thing that I do find missing from this report is what Tom Holland raised here, is the sensitive issues of ethnicity is religion. That is what I call the glaring element that's not in this report. It is not really linked. They talk about men and the ethnicity, but they're not linking the religion. Why is it that you've got all these different nationalities, Afghan, Iranian, and Pakistanis, all involved in it, although they're in a smaller level, and it's religion? So I wanted to just briefly go through that. I've gone as quickly as I could through it to wrap it up, but the two key points on there at the beginning of this piece is all the key elements that people look at, but I see the fact that we can now go out in debates and honestly show that the evidence that the government did on white people being predominantly involved in this is nonsense, that there is criminality from illegal immigrants and asylum seekers, and that we're very clear that religion is not being dealt with in this report.
Well, it comes down to, doesn't it, as well, the fact that, as we see recently with definitions of Islamophobia and things as such, that you're legislating against answers. Yeah. Certain answers simply aren't socially acceptable to be given, even if they're true, but you can just write it into law that, well, we're not allowed to come to those conclusions. It's madness.
I mean, I would argue the sort of ethnicities that we're talking about tend to have a pretty strong correlation with being Islamic anyway, but of course that should be mentioned explicitly in reports such as these as well, because these people are coming from countries where the people are majority Islamic, if not entirely.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.